Okay, hello everyone. This is J.D. Seal, Vice President at SkyView Partners, and I want to welcome you to today's sessions on 5 tips for administering security in the IFS. Today's host is Carol Woodbury, President of SkyView Partners. Here at SkyView Partners, we're committed to delivering products and services that not only provide our customers with sound advice, saving you time, reducing your costs, and simplifying the management of security, compliance, and daily security administration. Today's speaker is Carol Woodbury, co-founder, president, and CTO of SkyView Partners. Prior to forming SkyView, Carol spent 16+ years at IBM in positions including Chief Engineering Manager and Security Architect for IBM's iSeries Security Group, and is also author of her latest book, which came out in May, IBM I, Security, Administration, and Compliance, which is available on MC Press online. You will get this link after the session as well. SkyView Partners provides software solutions including the SkyView Risk Assessor software, which is our automated vulnerability assessment, SkyView Policy Minder, automated security administration tool, part of which you are going to see today, as well as the SkyView Audit Journal Reporter, which you are going to see today, predefined auditor-ready reports on security events, and the SkyView Policy Minder for IBM AIX. And remember, at SkyView Partners, we don't charge for installation and basic configuration, so we're going to help you get up and running and getting the value from your software immediately. We also provide services, including the SkyView Security Checkup for IBM I and AIX, our new SkyView Managed Services for compliance reporting, as well as re-architecture and remediation services. So with that, I'd like to start this morning's session and introduce our presenter this morning, Carol Woodbury, on 5 tips for administering security in the IFS. Carol?
Good morning, everyone. I will apologize in advance for my voice. I am a little froggy today, so please bear with me. So I get a lot of questions about how you manage the integrated file system. And so that made me think that maybe a webinar on 5 tips might be helpful. So that's what generated the interest and the thought about creating this webinar for you. So without further ado, let me get started on that. Okay, so our agenda, we're going to step back just a little bit, and until I'm not going to show the product and how you use the product right away, because I want to make sure that you have an understanding of where and lay a groundwork for the IFS security structure first. Without that, a lot of these tips are going to be meaningless. So we're going to talk about the differences and the likenesses between IFS security and traditional I5OS security. We'll talk about what authorities are available to you in the IFS. And then we're going to go through some scenarios. So I'll show you how to monitor authority to root. I'll talk about finding new directories or new objects that have been created into directories. I'll show you how you can monitor the authority to specific directories. So think things like a directory that is there to upload to perhaps your payroll processor, or perhaps for taxes, or off to a bank for credit card processing, that type of thing. We'll talk about maintaining appropriate ownership and authority of both directories and the objects in directories. So if you read this month's newsletter, you will see that I talked about some difficulties when ownership changes between directories and subdirectories, and I'll explain that a little bit more. We'll talk about auditing, the ability to audit and have information out of the audit journal about IFS objects. We'll talk about file sharers, and we'll talk about the use of this authorization list that IBM ships called QPWS server. Okay, so let's get going. So the first thing I want to talk about is really what is meant by the IFS. So when I talk about the IFS, this is a view through iNavigator. I have opened up the integrated file system link or navigation, and under it you see root, you see QOpenSys, QDLS, and so forth. So what I'm talking about today applies to everything under root and QOpenSys. And really the difference between those two file systems is that root is not case sensitive and QOpenSys is. Basically they're the same except for that. But I'm not going to talk about QDLS or QSys.lib file system today. So I just wanted to make sure you knew where we're at. So what are the likenesses and the differences between IFS security and what we all know and love as I5OS security? Well, the same authority checking algorithm applies. So it always checks the user access first, then the group, then public authority. Okay? So public authority is still there. You can use authorization lists and private authorities in the IFS, so all of that is the same. Now, what is different, and there are more things in the different column, if you'll notice here, than the same column. So the authority names are different. So the reason that the IFS, or the integrated file system, is on the system at all is because it was back when IBM was trying to push for Unix applications to be reworked and to be ported onto, at that time it was iSeries. And so the authorities needed to be accommodated like a Unix application would expect them to be accommodated. And in the Unix world, they don't know add, change, update, and delete. They know read, write, execute. So that's why the authority is different. So you have different authority names. Also, there are some things, and again, keep in mind the purpose of the IFS was to accommodate Unix applications. So if there wasn't the same concept in Unix, it wasn't implemented in the IFS. So the other thing that is hampered here is that the QCreate system value, the system value that defaults the public authority of newly created objects, that system value is totally ignored. The other thing that is ignored is the ownership setting in the user profile. So you can configure the user profile so that when a user creates an object, that object is not owned by the user, but instead is owned by their group. Well, you can set it up that way, but that's not what's going to happen in the IFS. When a user creates an object, they retain the ownership of that object. The other thing, and probably the biggest difference and sometimes the biggest impedance to reworking some security is that it ignores adopted authority. In each release, there's a rumor that the IFS will now accept adopted authority, and I very sincerely doubt that that will ever happen. I'll never say never, but don't ever count on that happening. So it ignores adopted authority. And lastly, the thing that's different is that you have to look in different fields in the audit journal to get the information out about IFS objects. Okay, so those are the similarities and the differences. So here's what the IFS authorities look like. So RWX, if you look at how the individual authorities on IBM I map out, that maps out to be the same as change authority. And if you look at RX and look at the data authorities and the object operator, that is the same as use authority. So that's how the authorities map out as compared to traditional authorities. Now the thing that you have to remember is even though we are dealing with IFS objects, under the covers they are still objects that have been created and are managed by SLIC, or the operating system. And so they still have to have all of those authorities, even though the data authorities are called something different. All of those objects still have all of the authorities of any other IBM I object, which includes these object authorities. So the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that they may understand that they have to manage these data authorities and set the RWX or just execute authority or so forth, but they don't realize that they also should manage the object authorities. And these are important because These are what allow you to either delete the object. Object existence allows you to delete the object. Object management allows you to give other people authority to the object. That's just the same as it is in a traditional object, an object that is found, for example, in a library, either the library itself or a file or a data area and so forth. So you have to realize that you have two sets of authority to manage, and you want to set them both appropriately. So the recommended value for root is public authority, data RX, and object authority of none. So I'll show you how you can monitor that in just a minute. So here's a little bit of guidance, and again, these handouts are going to be available when you get the confirmation email after this webinar. You'll get a link that you can download these handouts. So what I've tried to do with this chart is to just give you a little bit of guidance about what authorities are needed when you're trying to do something within the IFS. So for example, when you need to traverse down a path and there are multiple directories, you need execute authority to all the directories in the path. So I'll let you read that at your leisure and not take up your time now. Now, the one thing I want to say is that IBM directories are generally okay. I tend to only change the authority on the home directory. I tend not to do other directories, but I also do not remove any private authorities granted to IBM profiles. Unless you know exactly the purpose of that private authority, you'll see qdirserve, for example, qdirectory server, user profile, often having a private authority. Unless you know exactly what that's being used for, and the fact that it wouldn't need to be used in that particular directory that you're dealing with, I wouldn't remove it, because there are things that, one of those phrases, unpredictable results could occur. Okay, so public authority. So if the qcreate.system value is ignored, how is public authority set in the IFS? Well, in general, the authorities are inherited from the directory the object is being created into. And so that's all authorities, so not just public, but it would be the authorization list, any private authorities, and so forth. So anything that the object is being created, or if the object is being copied, it will usually take the authority from the directory. However, most of the objects, or many of the objects that are being created in the IFS, use these commands, copy to import file or copy to stream file. And before v6r1, it was, those two commands were hard-coded to have public authority set to exclude, as well as the primary group authority. It would not copy any private authorities and authorization lists, and the owner only had RWX authority. So when you use copy to stream file, there was always some fix-up that was required if you needed to have some consistency, or you needed to have one person create the object and somebody else delete it. So the nice thing is that in v6r1, you have some options for where the authority is now going to come from. So here's a prompt of the copy to stream file command, and the parameter that you want to look at is the authority parameter. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is to put your cursor on that field and press F1 so that you can see the explanation of the various options. Of course, the default is to have it work as it does today, because IBM tends not to change defaults. So that's the default. But you can have it come from the directory, so that's that INDIR. You can have it come from the file that's being copied, or a model file. So you have a lot of different options. Again, whatever works for you, you'll have to decide for yourself. But at least in v6r1, you do have some options. So with that little groundwork already behind us, what I want to get into are some recommended things that I would like to see you do on a daily basis, or at least fairly often, to help you administer IFS security. So one thing that you need to do is monitor the authority to root. Now again, as I said, or as you may have read a few slides ago, The authority to root is shipped by IBM with the equivalent of public star all. So what you want to do is to reduce that down to the equivalent of use, which is this public of RX and none. And then what you want to do is regularly check that. It's especially critical to have a template in place when you're going to upgrade, because when you upgrade, and if you don't restore all of your authorities, chances are, and especially if you are changing hardware, chances are the authority is going to get set back to what it was. In other words, public star all. That's not a good thing, because anything created then directly under root also gets public star all, which means all your directories now get public star all. And people can start putting things in your IFS that you don't want in your IFS. So how do we do this? Okay, so we're going to switch over to live mode here. And I'm on the main menu of PolicyMinder. And I'm going to go into Work with Policies, so option 1, and take the option to work with the directory authorities. And I'm going to take the option F6 to create a new template. And this is one of the easiest things you can do. So the template name is just simply going to be called root. And I'll just say check authority to root. And then the path is simply the root directory. I'm going to say include subdirectories. No, I will use that option in just a bit. But for this purpose, I really only want to check the authority to root. So in this case, I'm going to say public is supposed to be RX and object authority of none. Now, if you look at the authority on root, you may see some private authorities. So if you didn't realize it, I'm going to press F24 here. You can get a command line within PolicyMinder whenever you want to. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to do work link so that I can look at root. And if you didn't realize it, there's options that can take, including option 9, which lets us look at the authority. So you can see that public, in this case, is all, which is not what we want to see. And qdirserve is set to data authority of X. So we're going to accommodate that dirserve authority. Okay, so I've set what I want my public authority to be, and I'm going to say qdirserve, and I'm going to say object authority of execute, and none for the private authority. All right. Now I could create an object template, but again, all I'm trying to do here is make sure that root is at the authority that I want it to be at. So I'm not going to create an object template. I'll just create the template just to look at the top level directory for root. And now I'm going to check the authority and check compliance here. And of course, it's going to be out of compliance because it's the wrong authority. So there you have, in one simple way, a way that you can show that you can monitor for the appropriate authority to root. Okay, so that's one tip. Now the other thing that you might want to look for are new directories in root, or new objects created down the line. But let me look at this next slide and make sure I know what I'm going to show you. Yes, new authorities or new directories in root. So again, we'll go back to live. Oops, libraries, sorry. So new directories. I already have this one created because the compliance check for it takes a little bit of time. So let me show you what I did. I created a template. I just called it new directories. And in this case, I actually am going to search through the subdirectories. So this is not just going to look for directories directly under root. This is going to look for new directories anywhere in the IFS. If I didn't want to look throughout the whole IFS or throughout the whole root file system, I would say include subdirectories, no, but I wanted to find new ones where. So I then took advantage of this parameter called new directory allowed, and I said no in this case. And I'm not looking for any kind of authority settings, because throughout root you're going to get different owners, you're going to get different public authorities. So looking throughout the whole IFS for consistent ownership is just going to be a really tedious and nasty job, because it's never going to be in compliance, and it really shouldn't be. So again, the purpose of this is to find new directories. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to scroll down here, and I am going to create an object template here. So I created an object template. I pressed F6, and the way that I created it was to say that I wanted to include all, and this extension is *dir for directory. And in this case, I just had everything come from the directory again, and so I didn't specify anything here. And I ran a compliance check. So when I ran that compliance check, the very first time you run a compliance check, whenever you use that option that says allow new whatever, so whether it's allow new user profile, allow new library, allow new, in this case, directory, the first time that you run a compliance check, you're going to get a baseline of all of the directories on the system. Then I created a new directory, and I reran the compliance check. And what happened was that I got an item that was out of compliance, and I had created a new directory under the SkyView directory called test. And when I did that, it identified it as new. So it's out of compliance because it's new. Now, why would you want to look for new directories in the IFS? Well, if you are doing anything with replication, you may have to do something with your replication software to either make sure it is being replicated or it isn't being replicated, as whatever the case may be. You may want to know if programmers are creating new objects when they shouldn't be, so this is a good way to catch it. And maybe just for compliance reasons, you need to know when these are going. So again, this is a good thing to do on a daily basis so that you can keep track of what is going on in your system. Again, if this is a valid directory, all you have to do is say accept new, and it puts it into the baseline, just like it does, again, for when you do allow new user profiles or allow new libraries, same thing. Accept new will put it in the baseline, so it will not bother you again to be out of compliance. But if it is not a valid directory, you can leave it out of compliance so that it's a reminder that you have to do something about it and investigate it. Okay, so that's tip 2, new directories en route. And again, I've made screenshots so that when you get the handouts, you'll have a way to be able to follow along. The next thing that you might want to do, and what I highly recommend that you do, is monitor for specific authorities to specific directories. And again, when I work with our clients and when I work with all of you at various webinars and seminars, a lot of you have 1 or 2 directories on your system that will have very highly confidential information in it. It often doesn't stay there for very long. I call them kind of a transient directory, but it is something that needs to be protected because of the type of information that is in there, albeit be very briefly. So you have to monitor for specific authorities to those directories and get the authorities set up properly. So how do you do that? Okay, we're going to go again back into work with policies, back into the directories, and we're going to create. Okay, so I'm just going to call this one ADP. A lot of people use them for payroll processing. We'll just call that ADP, payroll processing directory. And I'm going to give you a hint. If you put in a path name or a partial path name and press F4, you'll get a prompt that will help you build that path name if you can't remember what it is. So I'm going to select this here. I'm going to take option 1, but if you needed to go to a subdirectory, you could take option 5, and it will walk you down the path. So I often do this because I just don't remember what I've called these things. So there's my path name, ADP transfer. And again, in this case, I don't care about the subdirectories. I really just want to get that first level directory right. And again, this is the way that when we're doing our services that we usually set up these directories for our clients. The key is to make sure it's owned appropriately and that the public authority is set. And then usually for these directories, there's only a handful of people, maybe even one process profile that actually needs to be able to either read and or write things into this directory. So as long as you give those profiles access, you should be good to go. And you don't really have to worry about the authority or the ownership of the objects in the directory in this case, because again, it typically is being created and deleted and recreated and deleted and so forth. So we're going to have this owned by SkyView own. And we're going to set the public authority to be exclude. And the private authority in this case, I'm going to give this to my payroll group. And I'm going to give them all authority. And that's all I want to see at that directory. And again, I don't need to create an object template because I just really am concerned about what happens at that directory level. So now I can run a compliance check. And again, you can either do that interactively, but what I would suggest is that you just schedule this in your favorite job scheduler and do this on a daily basis. And directory authority, ADP, I want to email it to myself. So yes, you can actually take the option if you want to only have it emailed to yourself if there are non-compliant items. You could do that if you wanted to. Okay, so it's going to generate that output, and it will tell us whether it's compliant or not. Well, we know right away non-compliant items are found, so let's take a look at that. I don't have my email up, otherwise I'd catch the report as it came through. But let's take a look. Okay, so we've got some issues here. So the owner is not as it's supposed to be. The owner is CJW. So again, the way that you read this is that the policy will always be in this middle section. So this is the way it's supposed to be. But what is on the right is what it actually is, or the current settings. So anything highlighted makes it out of compliance. So you can see that the owner is not correct. We've got an additional private authority here to Bob. And the payroll doesn't have the right authorities either. Actually, they don't even have any authorities. So I've got issues here, so I'm going to have to fix this. Now, if I wanted to, I could run fix it afterwards, and it would actually change the owner, change the private authorities, and so forth. So if I want to run fix it on this, I would go back into work with policies, come back into that template, and you can see that fix it is not enabled. So I would enable fix it, and then I could run fix it and have that make the changes. So that, again, is tip number 3. So that's monitoring specific authorities. And again, because of the confidentiality of this data, this is something that I would definitely check on a daily basis. Okay, so managing authorities. And again, I'm going to go back and refer back to the newsletter that I just put out. One of the newsletter was on 3 tips for saving time during your SaveSec data or your Save Security data. And one of the things that can cause a SaveSec data to increase in time are the number of private authorities on the system. And in particular, private authorities get proliferated when you are in the IFS. So if you have a situation where you have one profile owning a top-level directory and a different process creates the subdirectory, and then yet a different process creates another subdirectory, you are going to start propagating private authorities down the way. So what you may want to do, and what I suggest doing, is creating a PolicyMinder template to run, again, on a daily basis. We actually have people running this one several times a day to straighten out the ownership of objects in their directories. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to actually show you the proliferation of these private authorities first. Oops, helps to type correctly. There we go, open this up. And I have an IFS application. So if we look at the authorities here, it's owned by SkyView owned. So SkyView owned has that all authority, and CJW has a private authority to this top-level directory. So I'm going to open this up, and I have 3 subdirectories. Now if we look at the authorities here, oh wait, this is owned now by QProgrammer. So because it's owned by QProgrammer, the owner of the first directory gets authority, so that's here, as well as the person that had the private authority to begin with, as well as QDirserve. Okay, so we already have 1 extra private authority going on, as well as the fact that the private authority at the top level directory is being propagated down. So if we open this one up, again, it's owned by yet a different person. And so now we have the owner, so we have that private authority going on. We have QDirserve, another private authority. We have the first level directory owner and the second level directory owner. So you get the picture is that it just keeps propagating. Now it doesn't just keep propagating at the directory level. If things are being copied into this directory, all of the objects in this directory now have all of these private authorities. So if you think about the proliferation of objects, say for an imaging application, and how many files can be going into these directories, if these private authorities have been set up incorrectly or inadvertently, typically, on these subdirectories, all of these objects are getting these private authorities. So you can imagine how many private authorities are being granted to all of these profiles that have been given the private authority at the directory level. So what can you do about this other than scream in frustration? Okay, what you're going to do about this is to create a directory template. So I'm going to switch instead of showing it in the green screen. I know some of you prefer to use the GUI interface, and so I'm switching to the GUI interface for the rest of the presentation. So you can see that the directory authorities is under the basic policies. And so you can see we have created other templates. And again, if you prefer to use green screen, fine, and your colleague wants to use the web interface, that's just fine because it's the same database. So no worries there. One can do one can use the other interface. So in this case, we are going to check authorities for specific objects. So I've already set this up. If I hadn't, I would just click on this new button and I could create a new template, but I've already done that. So I'm going to click on the template name. And I put my path in. And one thing I didn't show you on the green screen interface, but is there, is this ability to add notes. So this ability to add notes is really handy because there are several ways to use it. You may want to add a greater description of what this template is doing. You may want to add who has created it and maybe put in some change notes and a date if you want to do that with specific changes. A lot of people will put run instructions here. This is run on a scheduled job that runs nightly or runs twice a day or whatever. So run instructions can go in here. The other thing that you can do is to put exceptions in here if you've omitted something, or you may want to say what part of your corporate standard is being followed. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this, and it will print out when you do a print policy. So it'll print up at the top of that policy. Okay, enough about that. So when you create this template, you're going to have to make sure to enable Fix-It, because the whole crux of this one is that you are definitely going to be running Fix-It on a regular basis, at least once a day, if not twice. So the policy setting in this case is basically what you're going to do is standardize all the way down the subdirectories and the objects in the directories, the owner and the authorities that are needed. So decide what your owner is going to be. In this case, it's SkyView own. Now, the next thing you have to decide is what your public authority setting is going to be. Now, in a lot of cases, the public authority setting is all. Now, that might not be the best setting from an authority or security setting, but sometimes that's the appropriate setting for, especially down the line, down the subdirectory, especially if you secured the top level directory. So public authority may be sufficient, and if public authority is going to be all, then you definitely do not need an authorization list with other people having authority. But if it's not going to be all, decide what it's going to be. I've decided in this case it's going to be exclude. And what I want to do is give selected users, or more than that, the group. I try not to give selected to do individuals. I try to do group profiles with the authorities. So I've put selected groups on this IFS authorization list. And what I'm going to do then is make sure that all of the objects in the directory as well as the subdirectories are set up this way. So again, private authorities is really what you're trying to strip off. So make sure that you check private authorities of none in this case. Okay, so that's at the directory level. When you go to the object tab, what you're going to do in this case is include all types. So I have all objects of all types. And then for the policy for this case, what you want to make sure of is just to use the directory level. So there's no sense in repeating all of the things that I just specified at the directory level. When you say and let it default to use directory level, all of the objects will be set up exactly the way that we specified at the directory level. So no need to repeat those owner, private authorities, and so forth. Okay, so when you run a compliance check, what's going to happen is that, oh, we haven't run one yet. So what's going to happen in this case is that it's going to look and see what the differences are. Let that run. It submits to batch. Shouldn't take too long here. There we go. Now when we open this up, we'll get a compliance tab with some objects out of compliance. If we look at the details, you can see the authorization list is not connected. The private authorities, the ownership, and so forth is not right. So again, since we went ahead and enabled fix it, we can go ahead and do that right now. What that's doing is changing the ownership. It's changing all of we're stripping off the private authorities and so forth. So now if we go back and look at that structure that we looked at before, you can see that the owner will be SkyView own and all of the private authorities have been stripped off. Now, if you need this to be working with LDAP, which is what the QDirServe is for, you would want to make sure that that private authority stays there, but I knew in this case that that didn't have to work with that. So I went ahead and stripped that off. Okay, so what are you going to do with this now that you've got your template? You don't want to do this by hand and remember to have to do this. So what you're going to do is schedule this at least once a day, and whether you do this once a day or multiple times during the day will really depend on how often you have to straighten that ownership out and give other people authority to those directories. So we have people who the end users are creating a document, and then that document is later processed by somebody else. And to avoid the chance that somebody else can't process the document correctly, this is run at least twice a day and maybe 3 times a day so that the ownership is always correct and that the people down the line that have to process the document later have the authority to do that. Okay, auditing for the IFS. Now, the IFS has full auditing capabilities, so the creation of objects, deletion of objects, authority failures, and so forth. The problem is it's even more difficult to find the information in those audit journal entries than traditional library type objects. So what we've done is in our Audit Journal Reporter product, we have created reports specifically for the IFS. And if you haven't seen this product before, we have created reports for all of the audit journal entry types so that you don't have to understand the appropriate parameters that might appear or have to decipher what the different codes are and so forth. So we have reports that you can run and right out of the box. So you can see there's authority failures, there are authority changes and so forth specifically for the IFS. So again, what you might want to do is use the condition list, which is the filter, and things like the authority failures. So if we go in and look at the authority failures, remember I was saying that you want to check the authorities to the ADP directory on a regular basis. I would want to be looking for authority failures on that daily basis as well, because I want to know if somebody's trying to access this information and they're not supposed to be accessing it. So I've taken the condition list and I said I wanted to see any failures for the ADP directory. And then I ran the authority failure report, and that looks like this. Okay, so you can see that it lists the date, the time, that it's a not authorized message. If we scroll a little bit to the right, you can see that the username shows up and where it was called from. And then the second line of that entry shows the actual directory that the authority failure was on. If they had managed to get within the directory and they had authority failure in that directory, that would have shown up as well. So a couple of the other things you might want to do. You might want to, and I have heard this on multiple occasions, a file got deleted in the IFS and I didn't know how it got deleted. So you can look for that. So another way to have a report, again, from Audit Journal Reporter is to have the deletion of objects report run. Again, you can run that for any deletion of objects in the IFS, and so just let it default to the root directory, or you can narrow that down. So in this case, it showed me that the directory in the SkyView directory and the subdirectory was test that got deleted, and the deleter is CJW. So how did I do that with the condition list? I just let it default to root. So root with a % after it is going to get any deleted object in the IFS. So again, that might be too much. You might want to put a path name in there with a little bit more qualification. So however you want to do that. But you can look for creation and deletion, the authority failures, all of that kind of thing for the objects in the IFS through Audit Journal Reporter. Okay, so that's just a summary of the reports that we generate specifically for IFS objects. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about authorities. We've talked about the audit journal. There's this other aspect of the integrated file system that a lot of people don't pay attention to, and that's these things called file shares. And basically a file share allows somebody to map a drive from their PC directly into the directory and make it look like that directory is on their PC if they open up Windows Explorer. Okay. File shares are not a security concern in and of themselves, but it depends on what that is sharing. The problem especially is when people have shared root, because when you share root, it shares all of the file systems, including qsys.live. So what would happen is if you share root and you map a drive to root, what I'm going to see in Windows Explorer are all of my libraries. Now, obviously, you don't want that to happen. So you want to manage when there is a share given to root. So there's a shares category in PolicyMinder. Again, we could do this through green screen. I have this open, so we're going to look at it here. Here's file shares. Okay, so file shares, this is going to give me a list of the file shares on the system. So in my policy are QDirserve and QIBM, but there's actually two others that have shown up when I ran a compliance check, QProgrammer and root. So these shares are obviously not in the policy. So when you run a compliance check and you see this, you know that shares have been added. So I see a lot of programmers that will add a share directly into their home directory. I have also seen them put a share on their library, of all things. So this is a good way to manage the fact that you can look at these shares and do so on a regular basis. So here we go with this shares policy. And again, what you want to do is schedule that compliance check, and here's the command that you want to do, and put that in your favorite job scheduler. So one thing that I'll leave in the handouts and not really talk through, but when you go to remove a share, one thing that you want to do before you actually do that is to find out who's using it. So I've given a little tutorial on how to do that. Okay, so one of the things that you might want to do is use this little known authorization list called QPWF server authorization list. And you may have seen it before and not had any idea what it's used for, but it ships with the system and it ships with public use. And the way that it's used is to determine whether or not qsys.lib should be brought back in a view in something like iSeries iNavigator or in Windows Explorer. And it's totally a filter. It's not applying authorities to anything. And if you go at those libraries through a different direction, users will have the same authorities they had before. So it has nothing to do with authority settings at all. It's just filtering out the view of the libraries. So you may want to take advantage of this, especially if you have had to share a root. So you can give users who really need to be able to use that map drive and may need to see QSys in that view, and let your operators, for example, see that view. So again, how would you do that in PolicyMinder? Well, there's a couple things here. First of all, if you have never used the authorization list, or for that matter, the file shares policy, what you'll want to do is this task called initialize policies. And you can pick and choose which categories you're going to initialize. In this case, I would choose authorization lists and or file shares. What initialize does is to go around and gather the, in this case, all of the authorization lists on the system and who has authority to them. So it gets the current settings. And in the case of file shares, it would get the file shares that are currently on the system and the path that they're assigned to. Okay, so I've already done that. When I go and look at the authorization list category then, what is going to happen is that I would run a compliance check. And basically all that's going to do is look for, again, the current settings after you've done an initialize. So you can see in this case I have this thing called a PCI auth list, and that one happens to be out of compliance. We have a user that's not in the policy, so he's been added to this authorization list and he wasn't there before. So this way you can very easily, again, keep track of additions or deletions from an authorization list. So in this case, we were talking about PWF server. And in this case, it's compliant. So let's see. The public authority is used, still used. That's the shipped value. and the private authorities are none. So on this system, it hasn't been configured to be used any differently than the shipped values. But if you want to use it, this is how you can check the authorities to that particular authorization list or to all of your authorization lists. Okay, and again, here's the compliance check command that you want to schedule. So just recapping, I've shown you how you can use PolicyMinder and Audit Journal Reporter for your daily IFS security administration tasks. We have looked at monitoring authority to root. We've looked at how you can find new directories, and you can use the same principle to find new objects in a directory. I've talked about monitoring authority to some very specific directories. Think about those directories that have very sensitive information in them. Talked about maintaining appropriate ownership and authority. Those directories where different processes write into those directories or different people may have created different subdirectories. So this is stopping the propagation of all those private authorities. We've talked about how Audit Journal Reporter will show very specific reports for the IFS objects. We've talked about maintaining file shares and the use of QPWF server and monitoring this, as well as your other authorization lists. So for more information, I have a chapter on IFS security in my book, but what we'd love to have you do is contact us for any of your product or services needs. And with that, I will turn it over to JD.
Well, thank you, Carol. Again, we have a few extra minutes here before the top of the hour, so if you do have questions, please type them into the dialog box. Carol, I'm going to upgrade you so that you can see those questions now, and give me 1 second before you start answering them. I want to pull the screen back to me for just a second. We do want to thank everyone for coming before Carol. We'll get to your questions in just a moment for today's session on 5 tips for administering security on the IFS. Carol showed you those tips, as well as she pointed out, the solution to how you can automate the administration of those tips. SkyView PolicyMinder. For those of you who have not seen PolicyMinder, you can certainly request some more information. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. It provides a mechanism for really comparing your security, current security settings against the requirements that you've established. So Carol showed you today how you could do that with security settings for directories. PolicyMinder can also report on security attributes for libraries, objects in those libraries, security configurations of your user profiles, system values, adopted authorities, and much, much more. The SkyView Audit Journal Reporter that Carol went into today is a set of predefined auditor-ready reports designed by Carol. There are in excess of 50 of those reports. Again, we showed you the IFS relevant ones today, but there are many other very valuable reports, invalid sign-on attempts, authority failures, commands run by a particular user, use of adopted authorities, and much, much more. So again, if you'd like more information, please contact us at your convenience. So Carol, do you have questions to answer, or?
One of the questions was, is there a command that will propagate the ownership and authority to the directories and the objects in it? And there is. There's change aught or change own, which allows you to propagate authority or ownership. So you can use those commands, and it gives you the option to propagate it. What you need to realize, especially in the case of when you're getting excess private authorities, it will not strip off existing private authorities. So you still need to take additional action to remove additional authorities that may have been granted to those objects. So yes, you can propagate an ownership down a path, but you don't assume that your work is done, put it that way. And somebody else is asking if the handouts are available, and again, there will be a link when you get a confirmation email after this presentation, and the handouts will be available via that link.
Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. If you have other questions or would like to contact us after the session, go to skyviewpartners.com and contact us. We'll be happy to help you. Carol, thank you this morning.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you all for joining us. That will end today's session.